Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Coffee with Craig, where we talk about firearms, firearms policy, politics, culture, media, all relating to guns. I mean, you name it, we're talking about it right here on Coffee with Craig. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for liking and sharing and making sure that your friends know exactly where the good conversation is taking place. Also, if you haven't already done so, please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook as well as Instagram and Twitter. In the case of Facebook and YouTube, make sure you hit the notification button. You guys, you know they're throttling us, so you got to make sure if you want to get the notifications and participate in the live chat, you got to make sure that you hit those buttons so that you'll get those notifications. Also, it's time for you guys to start looking at FPCgear.com. It is the place. FPC Gear is the coolest stuff. All the cool kids have it. They have the t-shirts, they have the tank tops, they have the ladies gear as well. They've also got the welcome mat so that in case ATF shows up to your house or law enforcement, they know they got to have a warrant. Folks, all sorts of stuff that you'll find there, and we're uploading new stuff all the time. So please, make sure you take a moment, visit FPCgear.com. Even if you don't need anything, I'm sure that the gun owner in your life most definitely would appreciate it. Folks, it is the place to be. It's FPCgear.com. Please pay it a visit. All right, we all know that, in this world, in this country in particular, there are a significant number of organizations and entities that are out there that are seeking to take away many of our fundamental rights. And it seems like there is not a more concerted effort than that which is against our fundamental right to keep and bear arms. And there are a number of organizations that span various different areas. And I just wanted to just point out a few of them, just in case, for those of you who may be non-biased. See, those of you who follow FPC and follow Coffee with Craig, I know that none of these organizations are going to be new to you. You are going to know and recognize most, if not all of them. But I wanted to make sure that for those who may happen upon this, who are looking for this information, looking for information on these groups, I need you to know these are not unbiased groups. But the thing about most of these is not most of them, all of them. They want to carry themselves off or bring themselves across as if, we're just objective, nonpartisan. We're just presenting the facts, and we let the policymakers decide what they will. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. The first one is actually the one that really kind of got me thinking about this, and that is the trace. Now, the trace was actually part of an article, a piece that was recently written by John Lott. You guys all know John Lott from the Crime Prevention Research Center. And he's basically was lamenting in his particular piece about, how the fact that the mainstream media and even the politicians look on the trace as a non-biased source of news and reporting on firearms issues, when in fact, we all know that them and many of their writers all receive backing, funding, whatever you want to call it, from organizations that are tied to, linked to, or quite frankly, directly from Michael Bloomberg. We all know who Michael Bloomberg is. Michael Bloomberg is the billionaire, the multi-billionaire that writes tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in checks every year to organizations, individuals, and politicians to take away our fundamental rights. Now, the thing about this is that, it's one thing, okay, fine, they're a media source. You want to recognize them as a media source. But to claim that they're not biased when if you only have to take a few minutes, go through their Facebook page, go through their Twitter feed, go through their news archive on their website, and I dare you to find just one pro-Second Amendment story in the entire bunch. I tell you right now, it does not exist. It absolutely, positively does not exist. Go. You can take a moment right now, go and look. My point here is that if that were the case, if there were absolutely no positive stories about the Second Amendment or about firearms, then why? Well, first of all, we know that there are. There wouldn't be other entities out there that exist that actually report on them, that talk about self-defense uses of firearms, that talk about some of the other things that are happening that may be causing an increase in violence. Like not too long ago, they wrote about an article, and we're going to do another show on that, where they were trying to tie the increase in gun sales to the increase in gun violence. Because as you all know, the nation, well, many, in particular in the urban communities, in the anti-gun communities, there's a massive increase in shootings and violence and crime. Now, common sense will probably tell you that the reason why people are buying guns is because there's an increase in shootings and violence and crimes, and they want to be able to protect and defend themselves. But anyway, so we know the trace is absolutely positively not objective. I don't care that they are not objective. I just care that they call themselves a media outlet and call themselves an objective media source, when you and I both know that they're not. They're just flat out not. And to have folks like NPR and the New York Times and all these folks recognize them as objective, as nonpartisan, well, we all know that that's just a bunch of hooey. Now, the next one is the Gun Violence Archive. Now, the Gun Violence Archive arrived. It was basically a guy who decided he wanted to track all the shootings, because all the shootings that he felt were happening throughout the United States. And so what he decided to do was he started raising money, and he got money from a bunch of anti-gun sources, including a gentleman named Michael Klein, who owns a series of stores. I think it's called ShopRite. And in essence, this is an individual who, well, along with participating in and giving money to a number of other liberal causes, sponsored and funded gun buybacks and things like that. So we know that this thing is funded by anti-gunners, right? But the problem also here is that the data and the way in which this individual goes and does it. I give an example, like they're widely cited as a source of information when it came to looking at information, for example, on school shootings. When at one point last year, they tried to say that there were that they had this astronomical number of school shootings that had taken place. Well, they included in their data shootings that took place when school wasn't in session. Maybe there was a drug deal that was taking place that had nothing to do with school. But maybe the drug deal took place on school grounds. Yeah, that was considered a school shooting. They included if a firearm was fired off of school grounds, but the bullet maybe wound up on school grounds. They also included that as a school shooting. I mean, a bunch of things that clearly were not school shootings, they included as school shootings. And their data, the information that's given that they put out there, is not questioned. It's far exceeds anything that's put out by the FBI. It's not consistent with FBI numbers, who, by the way, are the ones who generally at the federal level track this stuff. It's not consistent with the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, which, by the way, who also tracks this stuff. But flat out, it is done for one reason and one reason only, and that is to try and increase and over-dramatize the number of people who are killed with a firearm, or number of incidents with a firearm that take place in these United States, once again, in order to give ammunition to politicians who desire to take away our fundamental right to keep and bear arms. So that's the Gun Violence Archive. Now, this is a group that I am particularly familiar with, and this is the University of California at Davis Violence Prevention Research Program. Now, recently, the state of California, a couple of years ago, decided that not only were they going to this place already existed. This guy, Garen Whittemute, was already raking in millions of dollars to do research on to promote policies to take away our fundamental right to keep and bear arms. But what the state of California decided to do was to give him $5 million to make it now state funded, right? So we have the state of California that put money into an entity, and they're saying, well, this is the University of California at Davis. This is an individual who is, he's nonpartisan. He doesn't have an axe to grind in this. Yet every single study this individual has done, every single study that's come out of this research center has been biased and has been fundamentally designed to support a particular idea, each idea may be, but focusing specifically on taking away or limiting our right to keep and bear arms. That's Garen Wintemute. That is the UC Davis Violence Prevention Research Center. And the information that's coming out of there is not being just used here in California. It's going to be used all across the country, just like the data that's coming from the Gun Violence Archive. This is going to be the same thing. Policymakers are going to use this information. They use this, and I use this term very loosely, research. It's not research. It's really just propaganda to take away and limit our fundamental right to keep and bear arms. Now, there are some organizations like this one. Now, this one, it's kind of funny because now, once again, this is not just an academic institution, John Hopkins, but it's also, if you look at it, from the Bloomberg School of Public Health, the Center for Gun Policy and Research. Now, here's why this one is really kind of insidious, and it also actually ties back to the UC Davis health thing. Notice how they're trying to tie this whole thing to healthcare, right? They're trying to say that this is a gun violence epidemic, right? Now, mind you, these are the same medical professionals that have gotten everything wrong with COVID-19, everything wrong with the coronavirus. They've gotten just about everything wrong, just like they've gotten just about everything wrong right here when it comes to firearms and when it comes to the right to keep and bear arms and the quote-unquote epidemic of gun violence, even though it's already been deemed that there are a number of different ways that you are more likely to either die or encounter a number of other bad things that you are more likely to encounter as opposed to a firearm. But I won't get into that. But keep in mind that in their eyes, a lot of these medical professionals, because a lot of them work in hospitals, Garen Wintemute was a former ER doctor, they saw a lot of gunshot wounds. And so because they saw a lot of gunshot wounds, their attitude is guns are bad. Now, one would think that they would say, well, gee, we also see a lot of people who experience car accidents. So why are we not banning cars? I don't know. Kind of an obvious question. I'm sure you've asked it yourself. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that there's this link to healthcare. And by calling it a healthcare crisis, right, they feel like they can, all of a sudden, they don't need to be objective anymore because now they're a doctor. Now, the interesting thing about this is that doctors, by the way, are very, very poor researchers when it comes to things like firearms or firearm-related incidents. They think of everything like a disease, right? And they realize we have to figure out a way to stamp out this disease. If you really want to understand something relating to firearms and firearms law, first of all, it might help if you actually had firearms experts. But what you need to be looking at is sociologists and economists, people who actually study people and how they interact. In fact, most sociologists and economic, why am I having such a hard time with that word? Most economists look at gun control with a suspicious eye, and they look at gun control research with an even more suspicious eye because usually they go into it with a slant already, and all their research does is they slant it to basically fit their already foregone conclusion. And, that's the reason why guys like Michael Bloomberg give money to their organizations. Speaking of Michael Bloomberg, there's Everytown for gun safety. Now, I know all of you know about Everytown. You may not be familiar with the organization that it came from, which was Mayors Against Illegal Guns, which was actually just Mayors Against Guns. Because, none of the guns that they were trying to ban or none of the things that they were trying to limit were illegal. So I don't understand why they were against them. But this was an organization that was that had to disband because so many of their mayors and elected officials who were members of Mayors Against Illegal Guns, let's just say they were either being brought up on ethics charges, they were being arrested, or they were being shipped off to prison. So they wound up having to disband that group because, well, clearly mayors are not the sort of people you want advocating on your side. So then they decided, well, let's have Everytown. And Everytown, once again, receives millions of dollars. And they fund efforts across the country. They usually start off with with research. So they send in PR firms to do market research, to find out what sorts of ideas, to find out what sorts of policies, and to find out, by the way, what sort of words and phrases and catchphrases will get people in particular areas to potentially support their ideas. And that research that they've done it they obviously did it in California, but they've also done it in Nevada. And look at the direction Nevada's heading in their gun laws. They've done it in Oregon. They've done it in Washington. They've done it in Arizona. And Arizona's seeing probably the largest series of anti-gun legislation that they've ever seen in Florida's history. They're doing it in Texas. They're doing it all over the place. They are attempting to build a West Coast wall of gun control. And they're starting by planting the seed. They're trying to see, okay, what are the seeds that are going to work? Then the next thing that they do is they put money behind politicians. And they'll unseat another liberal politician who might be who either might be pro-gun or is not even or is doesn't or it's not a priority issue with them. They'll unseat them and put in place a rabidly anti-gun, anti-Second Amendment politician. That's what they'll do, right? And then they'll get them to implement their policies, which, by the way, is something that I've always said. Instead of us trying to convince anti-gun politicians to pass pro-gun policies, why not just elect pro-gun politicians in the first place? But that's what they're doing. And then they're going off, and then they're doing their PR campaigns, and then they're pushing the policy, and that's how they're being successful. And they're all doing it on Michael Bloomberg's dime. Speaking of Michael Bloomberg's dime, you have Moms Demand Action. Now, Moms Demand Action is not a grassroots organization. It is an AstroTurf organization. It's an organization that, once again, is wholly owned and funded by Everytown. And it's a way in which for them to have to look like they have a grassroots movement, right? These are women who go in that know nothing about firearms. At least I've yet to encounter one that knows anything about firearms. And their whole job is to bully politicians into passing anti-gun legislation. That's their job. They're like, I'm a mom, so therefore you should listen to me. I may or may not know what I'm talking about, and usually the ones that show up don't. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I don't know anything. It doesn't matter to them that they don't know anything about firearms. It doesn't matter to them that they don't know anything about the technology or about the laws or about what actually is reality. All that matters to them is they're a mom, and therefore their ability to have and raise a child, that's enough for them to deserve to be listened to. Anyway, that's who they are. These last two groups are like the political arms that are taking place. So how do we address these groups, right? What do we do? Well, we need to know and understand the institutions that advocate on our side, that are doing things on our side. For example, so instead of the Trace, we need to be supporting publications like Ammo Land, like Bearing Arms, like Truth About Guns, like 2A News. We need to be supporting those entities. We need to be going to and reading the information that's being posted there, and get that information that oftentimes combats the anti-gun narrative that's being portrayed by groups like the Trace. Because the stuff you read and you hear in the Trace, you're going to find in the New York Times, you're going to find on MSNBC, you're going to find in the LA Times and USA Today. All of that stuff, all of those talking points are going to be repeated throughout mainstream media. So it's important that, we make sure that our points get out there too. Those are some of the places where you can go to get that. Now, when it comes to like the research entities, like, whether it's whether it's UC Davis or it's the Gun Violence Archive, the Gun Violence Archive, or even Bloomberg School of Public Health. It's important that we support entities like the Crime Prevention Research Center, run by John Lott. They do a lot of good work. They do a lot of good research. And he's always putting out information and articles that are combating the narrative that's being put out by some of these quote-unquote research entities, the quote-unquote nonpartisan objective research entities. But he's putting the information out there that's debunking a lot of what they're doing. So you need to make sure that you support them. And well, I'm just going to be real. When it comes down to the advocacy groups, I will just tell you this. There is no group that is working as hard fundamentally. When I say fundamentally, I mean on the fundamental right to keep and bear arms than the Firearms Policy Coalition. Folks, I will say this. The NRA does their thing. And, they've got their guys all over the country. And, they're fighting. And in many cases, we fought side by side with them. But I promise you, if there is a place, if there is going to be a line where it's Second Amendment or bust, and if there's a place where the Second Amendment is going to be defended, and somebody needs to be there, but some folks might back out, FPC is going to be there. The Firearms Policy Coalition are the ones that are taking the lead on in the fight against the ban on 3D printing, on being able to put the information out there, the right to free speech to freely share information on 3D printing of firearms. FPC was leading the way on that fight. We've led the fight when it came to the bump stock ban. Everyone else was like, they're just bump stocks. Most people don't have them and most people don't like them. It was the Firearms Policy Coalition that led the way to say, look, if we're going to allow this administration to violate the separation of powers, to violate the law, to ban something that we don't care about, what's to keep him or someone else, a future administration, from using that as the impetus to then turn around and ban something that we do like, that we do believe in, that we do value, right? There is no group that is doing that the way the Firearms Policy Coalition is. So, once again, hey, by the way, since you already happen to be here, it's a real good group for you to become a part of. So you can become a member, or you can donate if you're already a member, or don't become a member, just donate. I'm cool with that. Buy our gear, FPC gear. We're cool with that. But whatever you do, folks, get involved and get engaged. This is vitally important. It's one thing to just sit and watch these videos, and I hope you're entertained. But if these things aren't inspiring you and empowering you to get engaged, then you're missing the point, or I'm not doing my job. So I'm hoping that I'm doing my job, and I'm hoping that you're getting the point. Anyway, folks, that's going to be it for today's Coffee with Craig. We very much appreciate you tuning in. We appreciate you liking and sharing this program, telling your friends about FPC. We are the home in the fight for civil rights. Got to use them, or you're going to lose them. You guys take care.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.